I received a text that said, "My life is a complete disaster. I feel empty and clingy and desperate all day, every day." So I asked her to tell me a bit about herself. She must have been new. I don't remember who it is, but she must have been, or I wouldn't have asked. She started off with, "My father had sex with me when I was really young." Okay, so what? Now, that's the brief version of what I said to her, but I said, "I asked you to tell me about you. And what you just described was what was done to you. Like when I go outside and I get rained on. I'm not the rain. I am not water. I am not wet. Who I am is not wet. No, my clothes and skin just got temporarily wet. Now, who did this to you?" I asked her. Now, this is a trick question. Everybody gets this wrong. "Was this done to you by your father?" The answer is obvious, right? Yes. No, it was not. It was done, and everything makes so much more sense. It was done by your father in pain. It's almost like he wasn't there. He was ruled by pain. Now, I don't say this to excuse him. Ridiculous. Occasionally I get emails later saying, "So you're excusing a pedophile?" No. I'm just saying that when people are in pain, they're insane. They're nuts, and they're only responding to pain. It's almost reflexive. Have you ever heard, for example, the ravings of somebody who's in severe physical pain? Like who just arrived in the emergency room and their pain is intolerable? I have. Or under the influence of drugs? I have. People are not themselves. So who are they? Almost unthinking flesh and bone creatures responding to pain. There have been times that I've been under the influence of drugs, like when I had my back surgery, and it turns out that I can say some really unkind things when I'm under the influence of drugs, and later Donna told me about them, and I don't remember a thing. Nothing. Like I wasn't there. So I guess you could say I said them because I was lucid. I was speaking articulately. I wasn't stumbling over my words. I hadn't lost my vocabulary. It appeared to be me. No, it wasn't. It was me on drugs. Just like your father in pain did that to you. People with Alzheimer's, let's make it even easier. Most of you have had the experience of being around somebody that you knew before who now is suffering from end-stage Alzheimer's, and they can say some pretty crazy things. Ask you who you are when you're their son or their wife or daughter or grandchild. I knew a minister once who would come in for his examinations, and we would have to bring him in the back door and sneak him into the room where we were examining him and shut the door so the other patients couldn't hear him because he swore like a sailor. It wasn't him. And his family would be embarrassed. And I'd say, "Guys, it's not him. It's his deteriorating brain speaking." Same thing with people in pain or on drugs or under the influence of any number of things. She continued. "Oh, and I liked it." Meaning she liked it when her father had sex with her. Well, yeah, it's almost like a dirty little secret that a great many people who have been sexually abused as children share, but not out loud. Because if you've been victimized in such a way, you get such a return from the victimhood that you don't dare tell anybody that, well, you liked it. And a great many of them did, which is why they let it happen, which is why they never told anybody. It's physically pleasurable. It makes you feel enormously important. Here's your father having sex with you when, under normal conditions, he wouldn't even look at you. Somebody finally paid attention to you. Still, it was his pain and your pain interacting. It's almost like the two of you were not there. She continues. I was a terrible partner in my last 12 years of my relationship. Yeah, again, pain. You were nuts. You're completely empty. You didn't have the one thing, love, that you needed in order to have a decent relationship. And in your pain, you responded poorly to your partner. I would imagine your partner responded pretty poorly to you. She continued, I had sex with my sister's son. Yep, I get it. Same explanation. Pain. And it's not an excuse. I'm not excusing anybody's behavior. But at least now you understand it. We hate being confused. Why do these things keep happening to me? We say. Well, now you understand. And once you understand, you can do something about it. You can do something to change the way you feel. You can do something to change the way you respond to people. And maybe last of all, we talked about this last week at length for some reason. It just seemed to be a theme running through the video chat. You can laugh about it. When you're nuts, you behave badly. And once you laugh about it, that's when you finally let go of the guilt. It's when you can finally really do something about it. It's one of the reasons for laughter. Here's somebody who writes, a member who writes, I just realized the connection between my pain and my tendency to criticize other people or situations. I was feeling down this morning and I noticed how I started criticizing people, past and present, in my mind. This is an old pattern. I was able to trace the critical tendency to my pain, in great part because of what you said about it on the video chats. This is what has been a missing link in my spiritual path, connecting the undesirable tendencies to pain. I could identify the tendencies before, but without the understanding that they're based in pain and where that pain originates, it was difficult to get them under control. Knowing they're based in pain allows me to get at the core and to change it, to understand it, which is what we were just talking about. Really, I thought I was just behaving badly, and I needed to change that. So here you were trying to change all of these lifelong tendencies and behavior patterns just by gritting your teeth and toughing it out. How'd that go? Badly. You continue. I thought that it was all my fault, that I was a bad person. I'm not a bad person. I was just taught badly. And now I'm learning how to behave more lovingly and productively. Now, do you see why I talk about the central role of understanding pain? Until you get it, until you get that it's a reflexive response, the only other thing you could conclude is that you're at fault, you're a bad, horrible person and feel shamed, or everybody else around you is a bad, horrible person, so it's shame or blame. And that always goes badly. Once we understand that pain is at the root of all this, well then, let's do something about the pain. Why not? Here's a member who says, my son, Danny, he's constantly demanding attention. I try to love him, but he never stops intruding into people's personal space and time. He does it with the family, badgering them to pay attention to them. Nearly every day at school, he gets in trouble because of his attention-seeking behavior. It's like he's filling his emptiness with sugar. He manipulates and hammers on people to get what he wants. I try to be loving. I give him natural consequences without anger most of the time, but it's not helping. He can suck the life out of everybody around him and hold the entire family hostage. I've worked with lots of kids who act like this in various ways. They intrude on everybody's space. It's me, 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 look at me, look at me. They're even willing to get into serious trouble just so you'll look at them. And the most common problem I see is that parents are not consistent with this. Absolutely consistent every single time. You signed on to be the parent. The kid didn't. You said, I will be there to love and teach this kid every single time, no matter what. And then what happens is when the kid's born and things get difficult, we go, oh, I'm just too tired to say something. I'm too tired to get up off the couch. I just don't want to have another confrontation with this kid. And guess what? You don't get that luxury. You brought him into the world. You made an agreement, a contract, a covenant to take care of this kid. For those of you who are listening, I then talked to the mother who said, well, I'm getting better at being consistent. It's not enough. There's some things you have to do all the time or it doesn't count. If you're consistent with the kid half the time, then that's actually more consistent than a roulette wheel. Life becomes a gamble to a kid. It becomes chaos. What if gravity worked half the time? Every single time he behaves unlovingly, he has to be told about it without fail, or he'll keep right on doing it. He's willing to take the risk and hope that you won't do anything. You have to tell him ahead of time that you're going to do this, and then you stop him every time he sucks the air out of the room or he gets in people's personal space or time, and teach him. And if the teaching doesn't work, then sure, there are some consequences. He may have to go to his room until he can learn to come back. Teach him this. The only reason he demands attention is he's not getting it. So teach him that over the next week, you're going to do an experiment where he's not going to ask for attention ever. None. Zero. And you are going to go out of your way to find him and give him attention. Say, just try it my way for 2 days. And see if he doesn't feel your affection for him by your giving him unsolicited attention way more than when he demands it. When he demands it, it really doesn't sink in. He realizes that he's manipulating people. He realizes that people are irritated by him pretty much all the time. And he doesn't like the feeling either. So he's old enough. Do it as an experiment and ask him to try it your way. And if he starts to intrude, you go, my way, 2 days. And at the end of 2 days, assess how it goes. If you really do it, he'll feel the difference. Children all over the world have, because I've done this experiment with hundreds of parents. Next question. I have a friend who has asked me to spend time with her. She even wants to talk about real love, but she is so negative and victim-y and intrusive that it just empties me out completely to spend more than 4 minutes with her. If I don't spend time with her, though, then she'll never get the help she needs, and I'd feel bad about that. So what can I do? If helping another person drains you, then everybody loses. You end up empty yourself, zero. You can't really help the other person for long, and they don't really feel it if you're emptied out, zero. So 0 plus 0, 0. So that's just plain stupid. It sounds selfless to say, well, I'll help him anyway. Not if it buries you. So what if a friend really, really needs an appendectomy and asks you to perform it? Would you? Well, no, because you're not prepared. And if you try, very likely you'll kill them and stress yourself beyond description. So you do what you can, reasonably. And that's all. Now, to be fair, a lot of people, when you do what's reasonable, when you do what you can, will nag you, beg you, whine, act like victims, make you feel guilty, and in the attempt to make you do more. Sometimes people will call me and say, can you blank? And I say, no. And they say, but, and I go, stop. There's no but after can't. No, can't means can't. So if you can't say can't and people beg you and then you do, well, then you were lying. What you meant was, I won't do it till you beg me. No, you have to mean it. You continue. What if she asks me for time? What do I say? Simple answers. Simple. Don't over-explain yourself. Now, I can't tell you what to say, but I can tell you some answers that work. You say, I just don't have time, which is true. If you were to give more time, you'd end up empty and miserable. Or you can say, I'm just not ready to have this conversation about time or whatever else she needs. You could say, I'm still too new at this myself to help anybody else. Or you could say, I suggest you talk to Susie, somebody who's more experienced. If she asks again, because many people do, you answer their question, and if they don't get the answer they want, they ask again. You repeat yourself, I just don't have time. What do you mean you just don't have time? I just don't have time. Oh, so you just don't have time for me? I just don't have time. Or you might say, I suggest you talk to somebody. If you explain yourself too much, people just take your explanations, they load it in a bullet, put it in a gun, and shoot you with it. So don't overdo it. I got 2 emails on the same morning. It was 5 or 6 days ago. The title of one read, Real Love is Everywhere. Guess which email I read first? It was cool. I mean, this is a woman who had been unhappy all of her life, has known as much trauma as any of us, and discovered what it's like to trust. And as a result, she says, if you look for it, it's all over the place. The title of the other email, Full of Doubts. I saw those 2 emails about 3 emails apart, and I thought, perfect illustration of a choice we make. Love is really all around us. Really. If we are full of doubts, we're choosing to die of thirst while we're standing in the middle of the river. We choose which way we see things. Recently, a man who was a computer programmer, very much in his head, very stuck in his head, all intellectual and cerebral, he chose to listen. He chose to listen to me. I'm just a starter. I'm an appetizer. Then he chose to really listen to something greater than me. And there's lots of things greater than me. I mean, a higher power. Call it whatever you want to. He chose to feel. And I hear from him every few days. He's coming alive. He wrote the other day that he wakes up earlier than he ever has. He doesn't need as much sleep as he used to. He wakes up filled with joy. And it started with choosing to feel loved. He chose, like the writer of the first email title, first email subject line, to believe that real love is everywhere. As opposed to choosing to believe what he used to choose, which is, I'm full of doubts. It's a choice. Wow. These 2 just illustrate it beautifully. And I worked with both people for relatively equal periods of time. In fact, longer with the person who said full of doubts. Here's a member who writes, what's the difference between helping someone out of love compared to enabling somebody? Where's the fine line? Well, first, it's not a fine line. Not at all. So here's a definition that might be useful to you. It's been useful to many others. Useful to me. You're rescuing people when you do for them what they could do themselves and what they need to do to grow. What they could do, what they need to do. And if you do that just because they ask you to do it, you're rescuing them, you're enabling them. Parents, for example, usually enable. Watch parents who dress a 4-year-old. Oh, please. My 2- and 3-year-old grandchildren dress themselves just fine. Now, often what they put on doesn't match. They may put on 2 left boots, for example. Oh, who cares? Train people, give them love, and then let them do it. Way more important that a child make their own choices, that they take responsibility for themselves, that they not feel enabled and treated like a pet, and they make mistakes along the way. So what? That's how you learn stuff. Here's a member who says, somebody asked me to do something with them, and I said yes. Somebody else asked me for the same thing, to do something with them, and I said no. With one person, I feel full. With the other one, I feel empty. Should I explain myself? And then they said, well, I kind of know what you're going to say, but what if they're new in real love and afraid? Then should I explain more? We kind of alluded to this in a previous question. Keep your answers to yes and no. if you explain, A, they'll argue with you, but B, probably just as important, you find that you're justifying yourself. And if you're justifying yourself, you're not feeling worthwhile. If I know that I'm worthwhile, I never feel a need to justify myself. If I have to justify myself all the time, well, here's why I did this and here's why I did that. I read letters from people where they justify every sentence they speak. It's because they don't feel worthwhile. And the more you explain, the more you give them ammunition to argue, and you tend to offend them, because the more we explain, we almost can't help it. We tend to throw in a little blaming, you know? Here's a woman who said, I usually have my grandson, Nick, over for a sleepover once a week. I arrange the time with my daughter, telling her to arrive at, say, 8 o'clock. I tell her that that's just the time that suits me. If it suits her, we make arrangements where we meet, a place that's between our two homes, since it's a fair distance, and everything works out great. And then I almost always get a message or a phone call or a Facebook saying something like, well, can we make it 6 instead? Because I have to go see a friend who needs me, or the younger child is tired, or whatever. And in the past, my habit would have been to be annoyed and argue with her and feel powerless and be irritated and resentful and try to convince her. And now, listen to this, she says, I would go and do as she demanded and hate the whole experience. In the past, she's dragged me into this by opening up with questions like, so, what are you doing today? Never answer that question. I always say, what would you like me to be doing today and at what time? You tell somebody your entire schedule, then you just set yourself up, because they're going to worm their way into it, make you feel obligated to use your free time for them. So she continues. So I would tell her, and then she'd use that to show me how I could accommodate her change in plans, like I was just saying. I don't fall for that anymore, she says. Even when we had arranged to meet up to return Nick to her, I could never reach her on her phone, and I'd spend an hour, no kidding, reminding her of her arrangements, get frustrated, and still it would never be on time. All that's changed since real love. I don't do any of that stuff anymore. Now when she plays her games, changing the time, I just say, sweetie, the time is 8 o'clock. No excuses, no defending. If you want to do it then I'll come pick him up. And if she comes back with any change in plans, then I say, not a problem. I'll be doing something else then, and you'll have to bring him on another day. And I don't see my grandson that day. Now, I would like to see my grandson, but I am not going to play this game with my daughter. I'm loving this. The moral of the story, this is the woman who's writing me, love is simply just not being afraid. That's really pretty true. Sometimes people ask me why I'm able to reach some people that other people can't. Well, I can't always, but I'm just not afraid. And if you're afraid, love's impossible. And the antidote to fear is love. So, yeah, love simply might be being just not afraid. Now, with practice, you get better at it, but boy, it's certainly the beginning. Here's a woman who writes, I think it was a woman, I can't remember for sure. My brother has some struggles in life with hyperactivity, and he has a son with OCD. It's being displayed now more and more in my family and being passed down to the younger generations. So listen slow. It may be passed down from generation to generation, but it's really unlikely that it's genetically passed down. It's pain that's being passed down. And if you pass pain down from generation to generation, and then you provide them with the example of OCD or hyperactivity, then very often those are the behaviors they adopt. Like it was a really common saying that, child sexual abusers were also abused sexually. No, about 15% of the time is that true. But child sexual abusers were abused, emotionally speaking or physically speaking. They were not loved. And child sexual abuse is just one of hundreds of ways for this to come out. It's, again, about pain. You continue. My brother called me and told me about something called, I chuckle every time I see this, ayahuasca, that he heard about, that is a natural drug, and he's heard that it helps with these issues. You're going to hear me laugh more than once because I've known so many people who've used this particular drug. It's actually called ayahuasca. And it's a result of a combination of dimethyltryptamine, DMT for short because it's much easier to say, and another chemical from another plant that actually facilitates the actions of DMT. I went to one source on the internet, although I've read about it in the past, and it says this: people who have consumed ayahuasca report having spiritual revelations regarding their purpose on earth, the true nature of the universe, and access to higher spiritual dimensions. I'm old enough to know that I've heard all the exact same claims made with LSD. Exactly the same claims. I'm also old enough to have hung around while all the claims proved to be absolute foolishness. There are no studies at all to show that people actually become happier. None on ayahuasca. People go down to Peru. Now they've actually made the drug and made it accessible to groups that meet from New York City to San Francisco. I also know quite a lot of these people who've taken the drug, and they do become excited. They experience a brief relief from their pain. So do the people who use cocaine and narcotics and sex and whatever. It's all an attempt to shortcut the essential process to happiness, which involves taking personal responsibility for your life. Memorize this. There is no shortcut. None. Everybody wants it. We want magic. And that's what drug users do. Everything people say about this drug was said about LSD. Everything. And it all turned to dust. Come on. Who can't have what they think is a spiritual experience on hallucinogens? You remember the old Walt Disney movie, The Magician's Nephew? That's what it's like being on these drugs. You can call them spiritual. This is one of the little sneaky tricks that victims do, people who are looking for a magical solution. You can call your experiences spiritual, and who can refute you? Because nobody can be in your little hallucination with you. If it were true, if DMT produced real happiness, ayahuasca, then unhappiness would be the natural result of an insufficient level of ayahuasca in the bloodstream, which is never naturally found in the body. So all we need to do to be happy is just find this missing chemical. Ridiculous. One of the reasons there have been no studies done is because everybody's really eager to find this shortcut. And another reason is that how would anybody do a study on the effect of ayahuasca on happiness when nobody knows what happiness even is? So it's tempting, it's fun. I've watched people sit around in circles and speak in hushed tones about the magic of this thing, but it's just exciting. One article talked about how people on ayahuasca, and I'm referring only to articles that refer to it in nothing but glowing terms, often people who sell it. They talked about how they consistently vomited. Apparently that's just an almost uniform characteristic of using the drug. And how their spiritual guides told them that it purges the negative humors from their bodies. Really hard for me to keep a straight face here, because that's the same reasoning behind bloodletting and leeches that were used in the Middle Ages. Are we really back there to where we think that we purge the body of negative humors? You continue. I checked into it online. I watched a YouTube video. The person on the video said it makes him loving, helps him to deal with his negative emotions and his self-doubt and self-hatred. Do you think it's a good thing to be involved in? Well, of course it helps him avoid his negative emotions. It's all fabricated excitement. Go to a rave where people are taking ecstasy and everybody's all, swaying and sucking on pacifiers and drinking lots of water because it tends to dehydrate you, and everybody's having hallucinations, and ask somebody if they're experiencing any of the deep pain of their childhood. Well, of course not. They're in a dream. But the dream can't continue. I lost all my negative feelings while I was on narcotics too, but it never lasts. There are no shortcuts. Believe me, I've looked for one. I have sometimes wished there were, but I don't really wish there were now, because it's the only way to grow, is to learn, to make mistakes, to screw up, to fall down, to bury your face in the asphalt and get back up again. Here's a member who says, one of my managers at work, there are two, seems to be under a lot of stress, or he's just unloved and therefore explosive. Probably both. But the external stress is not the primary problem, because happy people, it's been shown now in many studies, simply just do the job. They don't go through the unnecessary step of being stressed. There's a problem with the word stress. There are stressors, things that add to our burden, that give us additional things to have to deal with. You could call those stresses of life. But see, it turns out that the stresses of life are absolutely unrelated to the stress we feel. So there's stress that's an object, and there's stress that's a feeling. The stress of the object, being in a car accident, is a potential stressor. But how we feel, whether we're happy, determines how much stress it causes. Just as trauma is unavoidable, but pain is often a choice. I watched my grandson, I was 4 feet away, so I kind of had to watch him, as he fell into a fire and just scorched his hand. 2nd and 3rd degree burns all over his hand, arm. The pain was exquisite. I immediately got him into cold water. We got his pain under control. And, pretty much from there on out, he acted like it was no big deal. He went to the burn unit, and the doctor kept saying, "What do you do to this kid?" She said, "I almost never get to see a kid who's been burned," this is the pediatric burn unit, "who's been burned and came from a happy family. So I don't ever get to see how a kid who's been severely burned reacts when the pain is ameliorated, or the pain is affected by or reduced by the child feeling loved and happy." I found that very revealing. When we feel loved and happy, all of our pains become more tolerable. Emotional pains and physical pains. This member continues. When I ask him, the stressed boss, questions about things that are related to the way the company operates or to the way our project is structured and designed or whatever, he gets irritated and will say things like this: "That's a stupid question." Hard to imagine a boss would say that, but they do. Or he'll raise his voice and start shouting at me. It doesn't discourage me from asking at the time, and I do believe my questions are beneficial for the company, but it gets to me at the time, and I have to calm down afterward. It also makes me want to ask him about stuff less often, which would be a detriment to the project. What can I do? I've spoken to 5,000 people at a time in huge halls in China about this very subject, and explained that because of the way Chinese managers deal with Chinese workers, on the whole, there are exceptions, but not many, because they treat them badly, I said, you're starting to see a fall in your productivity, and eventually the rest of the world will catch up with your productivity. That was just a few years ago, and it's already happening. They're ignoring their workforce. They yell at people, they punish them, they don't treat them like valuable human beings. And as a result, China is noted for manpower. And with rare exceptions, that's all. There's only like a handful of companies in China where they have created the product, where they've designed it, built it, produced it, sold it. No, they just produce it, which really puts them on the short end of things, because if the producer can find, if the manufacturer can find a cheaper source of labor, they do. They move to India. They move to Vietnam. Workers who are not treated well are not creative. A Chinese man told me, he said, he said to me, how many smart Chinese people do you think there are? I thought, well, okay, I'll bite billions. He said, Chinese are noted for being smart people. He said Asian people fill something like 30% of the postgraduate programs in math, science, economics, those kind of fields at Ivy League schools. 30%. I said, wow, impressive. He said, do you know how many Chinese scientists who were born in China, trained in China, did their work in China, have won Nobel Prizes? Nope. None. Zero. Because creativity is not fostered. Because they're yelled at to conform. They're pushed, they're coerced, they're made to feel bad if they make mistakes, which is what this man's boss is doing with him. So my suggestion to him and those who are listening, when somebody treats you like that at work, keep asking. Before you ask anything, always prepare yourself mentally for the attack. Remember, I love you, and then go into the conversation full. Then when he attacks, you say, it probably is a stupid question. I'm learning how things work here. I appreciate your helping me, which tends to be quite disarming. A week later, he wrote back and said, follow up on the shouting boss. If it continues, is there a good way to let him know that what he does is not productive and stifles potentially useful discussions and opinions being expressed? He says he appreciates the direct approach, which is rarely true. When people say, oh, no, I pride myself in wanting direct feedback, rarely is that the case. So what do? You approach him in his office when he's alone and ask if he has time to talk. Never interrupt him while he's yelling and never interrupt him while he's busy. So ask for time. And then you tell him something like this. You don't have to say exactly this. You say, I know that you want our group or office or whatever to be as productive as possible. And you manage a lot of things at the same time, which I admire. I do have an observation that I believe would improve creativity, communication, and productivity. Would you be willing to hear it? Well, he's kind of screwed now. He almost has to say yes because you just said he was interested in the welfare of the company. So you say, I know that you prefer a direct approach because it's more efficient. On a regular basis, you become angry when people express opinions that you disagree with or when things happen that you don't like. Now, I understand that. You have a lot to manage and occasionally people make things harder for you. But I've observed that when you're irritated, people don't share opinions that would benefit the company. They don't communicate to you things you really need to know. And they don't work as hard. So we're losing great ideas because people are afraid to express them. And we're losing productivity because people are unmotivated when they know that as a result of their efforts, they're going to be yelled at. You can do whatever you want. You're the boss. But I would suggest that it would be more efficient and productive by far simply to listen to people and never, ever be angry with them. They hate it. You don't have to agree with them. Just listen and not be angry. Now, as I give you that as a possibility of something to say, I realize there will be some fear on your part that he'll blow up even right then and cut your head off. But I've helped an awful lot of people do this. And so far, when you say it in that way, I know you're trying to help the company. This is a way that you can help the company. And what you're doing now is hurting the company. I haven't had a boss blow up in return yet. So give it a shot. Now, you have to be calm when you do this. If you're mad, well, then you're pretty much screwed. Give it a try. Why not? He's already yelling. What's he going to do? Shoot you? Here's a live message from a reader. How can you tell when you're acting out of fear when it's just part of your personality disposition? For example, if you are naturally introverted, or if you just haven't grown enough to lose that fear of being around other people, or if you're naturally moody, or just aren't having enough faith. So how do you tell the difference between fear and not? That's what you're really saying. When you're afraid, your responses are involuntary. You really can't choose differently. So you might ask yourself, if you're a naturally shy person, when the occasion warrants it, are you able to rise above that and clearly and directly express yourself? If you can't, then it's fear. Fear of being around other people. Well, for example, I'm around other people a lot. When I do seminars, I'm around hundreds of people at a time, sometimes thousands of people at a time, and I'm with them from early in the morning till late at night. So it's constant. And yet, that's not my natural personality. My natural personality is that 3 to 4 people is a crowd. I vastly prefer to spend my time with very tiny groups. So when the occasion arises where it's needed for me to be with crowds, I can do that. So I'm not afraid. If the occasion arose where it was necessary, say at work, for me to speak to a group of people, and I felt paralyzed, that's not a natural predisposition. That's not my character. That's not my personality. That's fear. Fear is involuntary and almost invariable. That's usually the difference. Let me know if that answers your question. Here's a member. It says, the more I learn about real love, the more naturally I feel spiritual connections. That worries me. I'm a little concerned that if I become more spiritual, I'll actually become disconnected from other people, like some artists who live in their own world and don't care about the people around them. Still, I like the feeling. It feels really great, so I don't think I'll stop. When you have genuine spirituality, genuine connection, you'll discover that you feel closer to everything, closer to God, the universe, to every person. We're all connected. Everything's connected. Physics has proven that. And at the same time, you'll realize that very few people share your spiritual views or experiences, which would then tend to make you feel different. But oddly, that doesn't disconnect you from them. You love them while recognizing that they don't understand you. So you will be different, and they might feel disconnected from you. But you won't feel disconnected overall from people, God, the universe, even though you might feel separated from a few people. I experience this when I travel in Europe, for example, where spirituality, religion, even the mention of God is becoming on a par with, mentioning fairy tales. And I talk openly about spirituality all the time. I'm not trying to get anybody to believe anything. I'm just saying it exists. God exists, the universe, a higher power, something. You can deny it if you wish, and I certainly am not bothered by it, but it's like denying gravity. It's still there. So I recognize that on occasion, there were people who felt disconnected from me when I would mention these things, but those occasions were rare. And even though I recognized that the vast majority of people around me did not believe the same as I did, I didn't feel disconnected from them, not at all. Here's somebody who says, I'm a single mother with a 17-year-old daughter. Oh, I'm so sorry. It's a terribly hormone-poisoned time. I try to interact with her, but she stays in her room most of the time and comes out pretty much only for meals or when I force her word, to come to family meetings. Do I just keep making minimal contact with her so that we don't lose touch entirely and let her not come to family meetings and pretty much stay in her room? It is so tempting to allow a child to have her way. Your reasoning is that if you push her, she'll get angry and then you'll have no relationship at all. It makes sense on a level. Here's your math. You think, I have 2 choices. 1, I could push her away and then I have nothing. Or 2, I could let her have her way and then at least we'd have something. That's what you're thinking. It's what you've implied, and I've heard this question from many parents. So let's look at the mistakes in that reasoning. 1, if you push her away, you'll have nothing. Notice that your emphasis is on the word you. You are afraid of losing your daughter, so she holds you hostage. You're not thinking primarily of her here. You're thinking of the loss to you, so you lose. B, you have no idea whether you'll push her away. You don't. You've never actually loved and taught her, so you don't know what will happen. I can't count how many parents have told me, if I do what you say with my child will erupt and move away or go live with her father. Almost never happens. You've never tried loving and teaching, so why not? C, that is your primary job, to love and teach, not to keep her. Notice that's your emphasis, is to not lose her. That's not your job, to keep her like a pet. If you don't teach her, she's little better than a pet, which brings us to the second assumption you made. 2, I could let her have her way, and then at least we'd have something. If you don't teach her responsibility, who will? And B, she'll be crippled when it comes time for her to be independent. She'll be labeled by society as an adult. She's 17 years old in less than a year, and she's behaving like a baby. So by not teaching her, by not having some actual requirements of her behavior, you're actually hurting her. So if you let her have her way, at least we'll have something. No, you'll have a pet who will be crippled when she goes out into the world. It would be a huge disservice on your part to let her have her way. For one thing, her way is the way of just plain ignorance and irresponsibility. She doesn't know anything. She's never been prepared, which is, of course, primarily your fault, and has no sense of responsibility, so she's screwed if you don't do something. So what can you do to prepare her for the world? That is what you're doing. Not teaching her some meaningless exercise in how to function in your home or obey you. You're preparing her for the world. Her being at home is going to come to an end shortly, so why bother with that? No, it's a much higher purpose. She has to learn responsibility. If you don't teach her, I used to say this to my kids all the time, when they'd say, why do we have to do this? Well, I can teach you and it will be minimally uncomfortable, or the world will teach you and the world will crush your head. If you behave irresponsibly in the world, you're fired. You behave irresponsibly in a relationship, your partner kicks you out. You get divorced. You end up raising children like, you. The way the world teaches is by consequences purely, not with loving and words. And they'll kill you. So if you want, you could tell her something like this. It's up to you. This is just a way to say it that has worked hundreds of times before. If you want to live in this family, and that's your choice, there are certain minimum requirements of responsibility. You enjoy the privileges of living here, so you get the responsibilities as well. We all have them. I have to work and cook and clean. You will have a list of minimum requirements too, like, for example, attendance at family meetings. Happy attendance at family meetings. If you simply come and sit there with a sulk on your face, it doesn't count for anything. If you doubt that, try that at work. Get hired on your first job and your boss tells you to do something and you do it, but the whole time you do it, you're sulking and pouting and grumbling under your breath. You'll be fired. And if you say, well, but I was doing what you told me, he'll go, well, maybe, and I don't need to put up with this. Poof, you're gone. That's why you have to learn it at home. There are certain chores you have to do around the house and whatever else you decide on. If you choose not to do any of these things, the privileges and the responsibility go together. They're not separable. So if you choose not to do the responsibility, the privileges will be removed. Not because I'm the boss, but because that's how it is. So, for example, if you decide not to do the responsibilities, then privileges will be removed, like, you know how she presently spends all of her time in a room? She doesn't have a room. Just lock up her room. Nail it shut. Well, there are lots of ways to shut up a room without nailing it. But you just tell her she can sleep on the couch. I can promise you there isn't a teenager in the world who wouldn't respond to that particular consequence. You remove electronics, and on you go. until you have nothing. And you tell her, these are all privileges, not rights. And if you want to go all the way, as they would say in The Godfather, if you want to go to the mattresses, okay. If you want to move out, okay. You're going to really get her attention if you do this and you mean it, but you can't be afraid and you can't be angry. The kid has to learn responsibility. It's not an option, or she's going to be a cripple in the world. And it might be too late, but it's worth trying. The mother wrote back, so as long as I'm the parent, then I have the right to teach my daughter. No, that's not the point. You have the responsibility of teaching your child. Just like your child has to learn responsibility, so do you. How do you think your child turned out to be irresponsible? You, because you are. It's your job to teach your kid. And as long as your child is accepting the parent's financial support, that's you, the child accepts the entire parental package. The privileges and the teaching, the privileges and the responsibility, they all go together. And parents have the responsibility of teaching their children. This is a society-wide principle. It's not just a thing you're doing with your daughter because, she'll whine and you'll say, baby, this is how the world works. When we all accept, for example, the protection and the services of the government, the police, the roads, the military protection, and so on, we also accept the responsibility to keep the laws of the government, to pay taxes, to not break the laws, to not kill people, to not steal from other people's homes. When children accept services, they accept the responsibility. When children accept the same services of the state, they accept the responsibility of the state to educate them, just like at home, no choice. The whole package or nothing. Privileges and responsibility. Privileges and education, for example. Children don't get to choose whether they go to school. The government requires it. So this combination of privilege and responsibility is both with the family, with the government, with jobs, with everything. You're just teaching your daughter how to live. Children want to pick and choose. They want the good stuff, but not the hard stuff. I want the candy, but not the green beans. I want the privileges, I want my own room and the electronics, and I want you to tell you to go stuff yourself when you tell me I have to do anything. Wrong. And you've got to teach her that, or nobody else will. Well, they will eventually, but the price will be very high. You continue to write. As soon as the kid declares and achieves their independence, do all rights to teach cease, meaning my rights. Then it becomes more, would you like my suggestion on that subject, or would you prefer to handle it on your own? That's your question to me. Yeah, that's pretty much the case. Except that this independence doesn't just occur when the child declares it. You have the right to declare it also when she's old enough. You get to determine when the kid gets old enough to go, I'm not going to tell you what to do anymore. Now you get to kind of learn on your own and pay your own price. Life's hard, honey. Have you ever met anyone that does not use getting and protecting behaviors? Nope, not yet. I've met some people who were remarkably free of them. So if I had to pick a group of people that have been most impressive to me in using the least getting and protecting behaviors, it'd be my grandchildren. No kidding. By far. Why? Oh, I screwed up my kids bad enough, but we managed to heal enough wounds and teach them enough that then when they raised their own children, they raised them from birth with unconditional love. For 20-something years, I've been predicting what people would be like if they were raised from the beginning with unconditional love. I've been astonished to see that my grandchildren have been even better than my predictions. They are far better human beings than I am. I am just amazed by it. I don't see it. Let's see, this is from the previous question. I'm still a little confused. I guess I'm asking, How can I tell when I'm doing my best to grow? How can I tell if I'm trying and growing or if I'm just cutting myself too much slack with the excuse that it's just the way I am? Rigorous honesty. Rigorously looking at yourself and your behaviors and asking, is this unloving? If it's unloving, it's not just part of who you are. It's something that you need to work on. And doing it by yourself is pretty dangerous. So I would really strongly suggest that you run your behaviors by your husband, by friends, by people in real love. People who self-assess their progress in real love tend to almost invariably inflate it. And then, of course, they deceive themselves and head down the wrong path for a long time. Here's somebody who says, I'm learning real love and I'm learning answers I never thought I would. I'm happier than ever, but instead of having a husband who helps move everything forward, I have one who gets so paralyzed with fear that he's close to having a panic attack all the time. Sometimes he does. I feel like I'm dragging a weight around trying to make decisions and get things done. We're in the middle of a move, for example, which makes things harder. I'm unable to be as loving as I would like to be because I'm overwhelmed too. Yeah, I'll bet. And it seems entirely unfair. Actually, it is unfair that you're having to do most of the emotional work. But fair doesn't matter much. What does matter is what you do with this. Can you live with a husband who's relatively handicapped? Or is the burden too big? It's unlikely that you'll change him possibly ever, but certainly not quickly. I met your husband. It was pretty clear in his eyes that he lives as he chooses. So in his case, it's live with him as he is, happily, or choose to love him and enjoy the experience of being loving and happy yourself. Before you can reliably make that choice, though, you would have to feel loved and happy. You continue. He had a DUI last year. He's anxious all the time, has a court case coming up soon. It's been suggested to me by more than one person that he's depressed. Also fearful of almost everything. He has what he calls the white coat syndrome, meaning he's afraid of doctors and dentists, so I don't think there's going to be any professional help for his depression and anxiety. Probably not. He's probably a professional victim. Everything's horrible. You know, white coat syndrome, no, he's afraid of anybody who would actually make a change in his life. He would be afraid of talking to me, for example. I've met him. He showed no eager desire to do any kind of emotional work, which brings it back to you. You live with quite a bit of fear and anger still, because I know you too. So can you work on that to the point where you can be peaceful and make a decision to be happy with him or happy without him? I don't know the answer, whether you should stay with him or leave him, but that's your choice. Be happy with him as he is, learning to love him as he is, emotionally handicapped, or decide that it's just too big a burden, that it's killing you, that you can't grow with that level of burden, and then choose to move on. But don't make that till you know what real peace and happiness is. So, great questions, you know, as usual. You guys are really great at those. And the answers are fun. But don't get stuck in the words. Don't get stuck in the answers. What matters most is always, it's how you feel. I love you. There are other people who love you. There are people right on this video chat who love you. There are people in your groups who love you. People on conference calls who love you. Work at feeling that. That's what will make the biggest difference in your life. How you feel. See you next week.